Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Against the Odds. So last week we had a special poll for Against the Odds. In honor of Shadows over Innistrad, we had an all Shadows over Innistrad, all tribal poll. So coming in first place by a decent margin was Horrors. So this week we are building a horror stack. Sorry, werewolves, who actually came in second and had a lot of support, but not as much as horrors. So this week we're playing horrors in standard, and I have to say, you all picked probably the most challenging of the tribes to build around. With all the other tribes, zombies, werewolves, humans, vampires, you can build a pretty straightforward aggro deck. Well, that doesn't really work with horrors, so we have a motley crew, and what we ended up with is a deck I'm calling Horrible Dredge. So it's Horror Dredge, but it is probably also horrible, so that's how we got the name. Anyway, let's break it down. First off, of course, the card everyone is most excited about of the horror tribe, the Gitrog monster, the big ol' 6/6 for 5 legendary frog horror with death touch. You gotta sack a land at the beginning of your upkeep, or you sack the Gitrog monster, but you get to play an extra land every turn, and whenever one or more lands goes into your graveyard from anywhere, you get to draw a card. So our deck kinda comes in two parts, but they synergize with each other. So the Gitrog monster wants us to get it on the battlefield, hopefully have it stick around, and get lands in our graveyard to draw cards and generate advantage, while also beating down is a really huge body. A 6/6 dodges Languish, dodges Grasp of Darkness. Of course, the problem is it dies to Declaration in Stone, dies to Anguish Unmaking, so there are some things that kill it, but it does dodge some removal. So the idea with Gitrog monster and the way we build around in the deck is, well, there's a few pieces, but this is kind of the main Gitrog monster package. So we got 2 Groundskeepers, which allows us to pay 1 and a green to return a basic land card from our graveyard to our hand. So we can sack a land to the Gitrog monster, use Groundskeeper to get the basic land back, and then play it again, even twice, because of the play an extra land clause on the Gitrog monster. So it's a way to make sure we keep having lands to sack, keep having extra lands to play to generate value with the Gitrog monster. Then a couple lands themselves kind of combo with the Gitrog monster. Drowned Temple, basically a 2-card combo, since you can pay 3 to return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So we can sack it on our upkeep to the Gitrog monster, then pay 3 before our next turn, get it back to the graveyard, sack it again on our next upkeep. So it's kind of a free land to sack for 3 mana. A little expensive, but it does turn the Gitrog monster into a card that doesn't really cost us a land. It just costs us 3 mana a turn. So if we can get up enough lands, we can just do that instead of sacking our other lands. And then Evolving Wilds, I mentioned one of the problems with the Gitrog monster is it dies to some removal, and it doesn't really do anything the turn it enters the battlefield. Like, you play it, and it's just a 6/6 for 6. You gotta wait until your next turn to start sacking lands and getting them into the graveyard to really generate value. Well, Evolving Wilds is one of the ways we can change that, because if we have 5 lands on the battlefield and haven't made our land drop yet, we can play the Gitrog monster, play an Evolving Wilds, sack the Evolving Wilds, which of course puts it in the graveyard to get a basic land, and that lets us draw a card with the Gitrog monster. So Evolving Wilds is fine because we're a 3-color deck anyway, but it has some extra value with the Gitrog monster. So that's part 1 of our horror package, using the Gitrog monster to get lands in our graveyard to generate value. The other half of our horror package is really motley. This is the motley crew of horrors. We have 4 Geralf's Masterpiece. So a 7/7 flyer for 5, but it gets negative -1, -1 for each card in our hand, so it's not always a 7/7, but we can pay 3 and a green and discard 3 cards to return it from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Stitchwing Scob kind of does the same thing, except on a smaller scale. A 3/1 flyer for 4, but you can pay 1 and a blue and discard 2 cards to return it from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So since we kind of want to be getting cards in our graveyard anyway for the Gitrog monster, we're playing a package of cards we're going to talk about in a minute to help fuel that, and those cards also fuel our Geralf's Masterpieces and Stitchwing Scob, because it gets them in the graveyard so we can get them back. And also the discarding cards aspect, we can discard lands, which triggers a Gitrog monster, which draws us more cards, which gives us more cards to discard to Geralf's Masterpiece. So that's kind of where the Dredge aspect of the deck comes in. Then we have Forgotten Creation, also a horror, kind of fits the theme. It allows us to basically Wheel of Fortune ourselves almost on our upkeep. We can discard all the cards in our hand and draw that many cards. So I guess actually it's more of a windfall, but it's also a horror. Only one copy, but it can work. Like, it's a way we can discard Geralf's Masterpieces and Stitchwing Scobs. Also a way we can discard lands if we have the Gitrog monster on the battlefield to get more card draw by discarding the lands. So we're trying out a copy of it. And finally, Corpse Weft, one of the older cards that makes horrors. So since we're filling our graveyard, this is kind of a backup plan. 3-mana enchantment, we can pay 1 and a black and exile 1 or more creature cards from our graveyard, and we get an XX black zombie creature horror token with a power and toughness twice the number of cards that we exiled that way. So if we pay 1 and a black and exile a card, we get a 2/2. If we exile 2 cards, we get a 4/4. If we exile 10 cards, we get a 20/20. So it's another way to take advantage of the cards that we're putting into our graveyard. So I mentioned cards going in the graveyard is a key piece of our deck. How are we doing this? This is the package of filling the graveyard cards. We have 4 Vessel of Nascency and 4 Gather the Packs. Cards are kind of similar. Their main goal is to get cards in our graveyard. Vessel of Nascency, 1-mana enchantment, pay 1 and green, sack it. You look at the top 4, or reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You can put an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker, so basically any non-spell, into your hand and put the rest in your graveyard. So we can get a land that we need, dump our Geralf's Messengers, also dumps lands in the graveyard for the Gitrog monster to draw more cards. Gather the Pack, similar to mana sorcery, but it can only find a creature. And if we have Spell Mastery, it can find 2 creatures. But again, the main idea, fill our graveyard for our dredgy spells, get more lands in there for the Gitrog monster, and a single Epiphany at the Drownyard, the reverse X-Spell version of Fact or Fiction. So instant speed, X in blue, you reveal the top X+1 cards of your library. So if you cast it for 4 mana, you reveal 4 cards, and then you separate them into 2 piles, and your opponent puts one of those piles in your hand, the other in your graveyard. So just kind of a late game, get some more card advantage, get some more lands in the graveyard. That's kind of the idea of all these spells. Then since we're dumping so much stuff in the graveyard, we have a few cards to take advantage of the fact that we're filling our graveyard. So Den Protector is super powerful, but it's even more powerful when you're filling your graveyard because it kind of becomes just a tutor and it can get whatever we need. Ever After, double reanimation spell. This isn't a reanimate deck, but I figured since we're getting these things in our graveyard, it's probably worth playing a single copy. It could come in handy. And then Foul Renewal, a removal spell, takes advantage of the fact our deck is playing 4 6/6s in the Gitrog monster and 4 7/7s in Geralf's Masterpiece. You get to return a creature from your graveyard to your hand, and you give a creature -X, where X was the toughness of the card you return. So we can kill pretty much anything short of an Ulamog with that, plus we get back a Gitrog monster or Geralf's Masterpiece. Then we have some just normal removal, 3 Gasps of Darkness, 4 Languishes. It's a way to keep ourselves alive. Our deck is a bit slow and clunky. I mean, we got 8 5-drops in Gitrog monster and Geralf's Masterpiece. So the early turns are a bit slow, so we need a way to stabilize until we can play our big things. Mana base, a bunch of pain lands, a couple of creature lands, and a bunch of basics. And remember, I already mentioned the Drownyard Temples and Evolving Wilds. So those are lands as well, but they kind of fit a specific package. And sideboard, we have Duresses, Transgress the Minds, and Negates. So one of my big worries with this deck is it's kind of slow, and we have cards that don't impact the battlefield right away most of the time in the Gitrog monster and in Geralf's Masterpiece. So my worry is we play one of these, we gotta wait till the next turn for it to really do anything, and it gets hit by a Declaration in Stone or an Anguish Unmaking. Duress, Transgress the Mind, and Negate give us a way to preemptively get rid of those cards in the case of the discard, or to counter one of those removal spells in negate. So that's the main reason they're in the deck. Then we have a bit more removal. Ultimate Price, just an additional kill spell. Flaying Tendrils, really helpful against mono-white humans and the small creature aggro decks. Also can be helpful against like LSV's deck from the Pro Tour, the Aristocrats deck, because it exiles the creatures if they die. And then 2 Naturalize. Basically, I was worried about the Goggles ramp deck that we saw a lot of at the Pro Tour. I thought a lot of people might be playing that, and I didn't want to just auto-lose to Pyromancer's Goggles. Anyway, that's the deck. Horrible Dredge. As far as being good, I don't know. My main worry is we're just going to try to tap out for these expensive things and see them killed for 2 mana by Declaration of Stone, see them bounced for 3 mana by Reflector Mage, and we just get tempoed out of the game. The good news is, I think we can grind. Like, we got some grindiness going on, and when things go right and our stuff doesn't die, we can generate a ton of value with our horror package, getting things back from the graveyard, cycling through our deck, and our threats are really big. That's the other thing I like. Geralf's Masterpiece and the Gitrog monster, yes, they die to Declaration in Stone and Anguish Unmaking, but they don't die to a lot of other spells. The non-white removal spells have a really hard time killing them. Gitrog monster doesn't die to Ultimate Price. Neither of them die to Languish. Neither of them die to Grasp. So they are resilient in their own way, but it's very matchup dependent. So I'm going to say we win, maybe 30% of the time. Well, let's say 33, so a nice round number. About 1 in 3 games. As far as winning matches, it's going to depend on the matchups. I think we want to play, especially post-sideboard, against controlling decks, because we have the ability to grind with them and have a lot of counters and disruption after sideboarding. Against aggro decks, we're leaning really hard on things like Languish, and against decks like Company, even Languish probably isn't good enough. So those are the matchups that really scare me. But we'll see how it goes. I think it's going to be fun, and we get to play a lot of really sweet new cards, so it should be awesome either way. Anyway, make sure to check out the website, mtggoldfish.com. Decks, prices, metagame, strategy, pretty much anything and everything you could want related to Magic the Gathering. And if you enjoyed our horrible Dredge in Standard, make sure to click the like and subscribe buttons that are about to pop up on the bottom of your screen. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoy our videos, and I will talk to you soon.